Good afternoon, everyone.
Not yet.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Children Education and Communities Scrutiny Committee on 4th of January 2022, and Happy New Year. I'm Councillor Simon Daubney, the chair of this committee, and I shall be chairing this evening's meeting. Until the end of this month, the Council is reverting to holding its scrutiny meetings remotely to minimise any risks to all those attending during the continuing COVID pandemic. If you're watching from home, you will see my fellow committee members around the virtual table with letters CLLR in front of their names, while council officers will switch on their cameras when they're joining in the discussion. I have received apologies from Councillor Baker for tonight's meeting, and I propose a 15-minute break around 7 p.m. We have a busy agenda tonight, so let us begin. Right, the first item is declarations of interest. Do any members have declarations of interest on any matters on the agenda, please? Take that as a no. Thank you very much. Item 2 is the minutes of the meetings held on 27th September and 6th of October 2021. Are there any revisions which anyone would like to make? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. I hope you don't mind. I'm keeping my video off just because my internet connection is awful.
That's fine. We understand. Thank you.
Brilliant. On page 3, it's not a revision. I'll come to that in a minute. But on page 3, the first bullet point at the top, the figures for the 12-month spend on agency staff are requested, and the direct these. I can't remember ever receiving that. I was wondering if we could just get an update or make sure that happens.
Yeah, I'm sure we can. Thank you very much for that.
And then on page, about halfway down, the second set of bullet points, due to the complicity of some cases, the financial pressures did not necessarily amend when the children and young people I don't really know what this means. I just wondered if that's just it should be complexity of cases.
I'm sure it will. I'm sorry, Councillor Webb, which page was that? You're breaking up again, I'm afraid. Which page was
the second part is page 11.
Right.
And it's the second bullet point of the second sequence.
I think it's one of those things which we've all read and then we just changed our minds. Yes, I see exactly what you mean. Right, thank you very much. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Hello. Yes, I just want to check that we are going to be hearing something later that's in the minutes, on both sets of minutes. It's on page 4 to start with. On the first set of minutes, it talks about officers are working to establish why some parents did not engage in the 2-year-old health check. And then in the next set of minutes, it goes on to say who they were working with to try and establish that. So I'm just hoping that we're going to hear something later about that then. It's been in both sets of minutes.
I'm hoping that the officers are listening and somebody will be able to respond to that for you, Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you.
Right, thank you all very much. I'll ask for those changes to be made and then I'll sign the minutes accordingly at appropriate point. Can I have a proposal, please, for approving the minutes subject to those alterations? Thank you, Councillor Barker. And the seconder, please. Councillor Fenton, thank you both very much. Item 3 is public participation. There have been no registrations to speak for members of the public this evening. Item 4 is the Holiday Activities and Food HAF Programme 2021 update. I'm hoping to hear from Barbara Manns, Tim Wardby, Pauline Stutchfield, and possibly Maura Scaife. Thank you very much.
Hello there. I'm going to give an overview of the HAF programme, where we're at with it. So I'm Barbara Manns and I'm Head of Education Support Services. And Tim Wardby's with us tonight as well, who can give a bit more detail on the delivery of Christmas as well and answer any questions around summer.
Thank you, Barbara.
And I'm hoping that we can come back to paragraphs 2 and 3 that refer to the food vouchers, and Pauline's with us in respect of that part of the report. So just to give you the overview, York began delivery of the HAF programme back in Easter of last year, and that was part of a national scale up of the programme, and the purpose is to offer free holiday related free school meals aged 5 to 16 for at least 4 hours each day, 4 days a week, 6 weeks a year, which means 4 weeks in the summer and a week at Easter, and also a week at Christmas. And the programme, it very much intends that there should be, wherever possible, a hot meal offered to children and young people as part of that activity. York's funding allocation to deliver the programme is up to 383,000 in this financial year. And we've just been informed by the DfE that funding will continue for the next 2 years as well. And we've had it confirmed that the allocation for 22-23 will be up to 407,000, and that does include some management costs at 10% as part of that. In terms of delivery, it has been really challenging during the year because of COVID, in particular at Christmas with the Omicron variant, which Tim will provide more detail about. But what those providers that we commissioned during the summer and for Christmas, they were asked to put in place a plan B as a condition of the grant for dealing with a variant. And also be very clear about their risk assessments as well. So for the summer 2021, we did have a successful delivery, and considering that was our second on the ground programme, we did reach 20% of eligible children across the city, and we had evidence of positive impact from the reports that we had from providers. We had quotes from children and young people, evaluations and parental feedback as well. There were some key learning points to come out of the summer, and that was around the children and young people, but that does mirror what the schools have experienced through the pandemic as well. And it's despite the fact that we've got a very inclusive set of activity providers and holiday club providers, very well versed in supporting children with challenging behaviour, but they did find it challenging at times. Our booking system could have been smoother during the summer, and we have tried to put that right for the Christmas bookings, and it seemed to work much more smoothly. And we know that we do have a gap for children who are aged 14 upwards. So moving on to the Christmas delivery, I'm going to hand over to Tim now, but it isn't a complete picture, it's just the information that we have today because we're still gathering that information as we speak. So I'll hand over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thanks, Barbara. Happy New Year, everybody. It's Tim Wardby from the communities team. Just building on what Barbara was saying about the summer delivery, Christmas was obviously quite challenging because we didn't know that we'd be dealing with Omicron, although we did kind of factor in every eventuality to our commissioning, so we're kind of prepared to be on a bit of a back foot. Christmas went really well, given the challenges that we had, and we already had planned activities. This is commissioned activities that would reach 675 children and young people, plus whatever out of school club offers that we were able to make. We had a bit of a deal with some of our out of school clubs that if any families approached wanting more local provision, that we could possibly put them into their nearest out of school club. There weren't that many open for Christmas, but those that did come alongside us did offer some places. So the capacity of 675 children and young people over that week period was probably a little bit more. The difference between the Christmas and the summer numbers, if you like, is the capacity of 675 is for the full 4 days. So each of those places, if you like, would be for the full prescribed 4 days of the holidays. Excuse me. Whereas in summer, we're a little bit more ad hoc. So some activities maybe just provided a couple of days or a week, and others provided the full 4 weeks. So Christmas was almost a surprise to myself in that I thought it would be very challenging to be able to give a good offer, if you like. We'll reach that 20% again, just with the prescribed activities that we commissioned. Christmas is a funny time, and I can speak from past experience running Shine for many years, in that it's difficult to engage with kids and families over Christmas. They tend to have other things to do, particularly with the pandemic on our backs as well. We felt initially that families were staying away a little bit, possibly because they just didn't want to be ill for Christmas. So that was a consideration that we had to take on. Most of the activities that I've heard from so far, and it's still, as Barbara says, quite early to get a full picture, have done quite well. So the bigger activities like your York City Football Foundation and the York City Knights, that are just well versed in doing this kind of thing anyway, did quite well. The smaller activities do tend to struggle a little bit, and it may be because the bigger providers do have a better relationship with schools, and that's a key point really. We marketed this very tactfully, if you like, and that's possibly why some of you might not have seen it advertised too much, because we needed to get to the families that were eligible, rather than flood some of the activities with non-eligible families, which was always a concern that we had. Having said that, the DFE are very keen on the activities being a mix of paid for places and free places that are available to children and families on free school meals. That kind of keeps your peer groups together, excuse me, and kind of avoids any stigma, if you like. We on top of the places that we had for Christmas, so we've already got that capacity of offering 20%. We put together 400 hampers, food hampers, and activity packs, if you like. So I don't know if Barbara mentioned, but we've got kind of a fluid number of roughly about 3,500 to 3,700 families on, or children, if you like, on free school meals in the city. Comparatively with other local authorities, that's quite small. So in York, we're quite lucky in that we have quite a high number of activities, after school activities and providers, with quite a low number of eligible free school meal children and young people. So that puts us in quite a good place to be able to offer things. The average across the country for what other authorities have been reaching in terms of the targets has only been about 10%. It's been quite low. Authorities have found a massive challenge to match enough activity provision with the number of eligible children and families that they have. In particularly areas like Sheffield and Newcastle, you can imagine that there's quite a lot and often very little provision. So those 400 families were on top of the 675 plus the other out of school places. So we're close to a capacity of about 1,000 places over Christmas. So as you can imagine, that's kind of touching about a quarter of all our eligible families, which I was quite pleased about. The DFE quite like pulling the rug from under us a little bit. So just before we were set to go, I can see Ian laughing. Just before we were about to press the button on go, the DFE changed the guidance. So they were asking that we only delivered face-to-face activities. Some authorities had banked on just being able to give out food hampers and activity packs to their families, which caused them some serious problems. We kind of got around that by offering kind of little informal parties within our community hubs. So each of our 6 community hubs had a Christmas party, if you like. It was quite informal and had some sort of touchdown activities provided by an activity provider that came in. Some offered their own activities, and some were just more a little bit of a come and pick up and say hello kind of thing. And that kind of satisfied the advisor from DFE that I spoke to in terms of those being face-to-face activities. As long as the families came and met with somebody and did a little bit of something, then that was fine. So we kind of got round that in that respect. Christmas was a massive learning curve, so certainly for me personally, having run half since last Easter, in that I realised that there were some families that just weren't in the right place to be able to access activities. So that then gives you a number that's going to be excluded from the project that's there to help them. I was based at Hobmore, giving out the 400 food hampers, giving those out to the various community hubs that we've got. And I was also working with the local area team practitioners, the early help practitioners, some of the health visitors and some people from the Portage team, funny enough. And they kind of reported back to me that there was some quite sad instances. There was one family whereby the dad had just given up work to look after the mum that had terminal cancer, and they had a little girl. There was another family that was actually a single parent family that had two quite profoundly autistic children that just couldn't really get out to any activities. So we did a few kind of door-to-door drop-offs as well, and worked with those practitioners. And moving forward, that's something I'll probably bang the drum on in terms of, and I think it's a bit of an oversight of the DFE that there are families out there that just aren't going to be able to get together to go to an activity. So we need to go to them in those instances. And as I say, I kind of found a way around doing that. What I did before I left Hobmore is leave a little food bank there in the kitchens at Hobmore for those practitioners to use. And I said to them, feedback to me if you find that useful, because that could be something that we do across the other children's centres and the hubs moving forward into next year. As I say, I do kind of feel we need to think more tactfully as to how we address some of those families. And that's kind of it in a nutshell. As I say, it's too early at this stage to, I've not quite been back long enough from Christmas yet to speak to all the providers. Some have given me some good feedback. As I said, they've been quite successful on the whole. It has been quite a challenging time, as schools have found as well. Moving forward as well, I did kind of scribble down a few kind of pointers that I'm kind of keeping in mind for the year to come. And one of the authorities I've been speaking to have named teachers in each of the schools. So that kind of guarantees us a link into each school that teacher would be very well aware of what HAF is. It would usually be somebody in the pastoral teams, and they would be able to refer those families on. That's kind of how we've relied on the activities being used by the right eligible families, in that they've been taking the referrals in from schools. So having that one staff member in each of the schools would help that. There are some schools in York that have very low numbers of eligible children. So you're looking at some of the schools might only have one. So a place like Rufford, for example, and I haven't seen the data recently, but they're going to have a very low number of maybe one or two. So it's again how we make sure that those families don't lose out. We'll possibly target the commissioning a little bit better next year. So again, possibly focus on working with the providers that did good, essentially, for this year. There's been some quite good cross-working with the partners and some of the organisations that have provided the food. And that's kind of a key tripping point with HAF, in that we have plenty of fantastic providers that can do activities, but how do they then link to providing food and possibly hot meals? And for some, certainly that will be a real challenge. I can say that Choose 2 have been fantastic in providing endless amounts of packed lunches that have gone hand in hand with some of the sports provision that we've put on in the parks. And that will hopefully continue. But I think we need to look at how we can possibly start offering more hot food provision, and that might be something that we talk to our hubs about in the following holiday periods. I think that's about all I can say. If there's any questions anybody has at this stage.
Thank you, Tim. Can I just start with one question, just to ask whether there's any evidence at this stage whether some of the young people and children who participated in the Summer 21 HAF programme also returned at Christmas, or is that too early to ask that question? Thank you.
It's possibly too early to answer that question, and from experience,
enough.
I would say that you do tend to get a different cohort in Christmas. Christmas is a notoriously difficult time to engage families. Back in my old Shine days, and those who have known me for a while will appreciate, I used to run the Shine magazine for many a year, and actually stopped doing a Christmas edition because we just didn't get the numbers on it. So to engage with families at this time is quite tricky, and that's where the community hub parties were a real boost to us, if you like, and to make those 400 hampers up was a real good leg up to the numbers in general. It was hard work as well, I can tell you, packing all those carrier bags full of food. One of the lessons I did learn was that I massively underestimated what 400 bags of shopping would look like when it came in the trucks that pulled up outside Hobmore. It was quite a fright, and I do have to just use this platform to say a massive thank you to my colleagues in the communities team. Without them, I'd have been stuffed. I had a little accident just before Christmas, and I broke my right hand, so I was literally one-handed at Hobmore at one point. So yeah, I do have to thank my colleagues at this point, and Maura, who I know is in this meeting, has been fantastic.
I think on behalf of all the committee, we'd like to thank you too for all your hard work as this very important project. Can I take Councillor Fitzpatrick's question next, please?
Thank you. Well, I would agree. A lot of work's gone into this, so well done for that. And I can sympathise about your hand. I broke my wrist in 2 places this time last year. So trying to operate without your right hand or arm is very difficult. So well done for that. I suppose really the obvious thing is the numbers. You know, it's just so disappointing about the take-up numbers, really. And that's not a question. I suppose that's just an observation on what we're looking at here, really. Again, the free school meal benchmark or criteria for use, I would want to be sure that we're absolutely checking that everybody who is eligible is getting free school meals and therefore can access these things, because it might be the case that some families still aren't accessing it. And when I did a scrutiny topic on this in the previous council time, we discovered that some schools were much better than others, and some weren't really trying hard enough to get the numbers there, really, which does impact, as you say, on one child in Rougheth. Maybe it's much harder if you've only got 1 or 2 children in a school. So that's just what I would say on that. Christmas, as you've said, it's too soon really to say much, but when we use terms like weren't many, presumably we will get a clearer breakdown as we go on through the year, really, on that. So I'm not asking a question, really. I'm making observations. I'm disappointed about the take-up, really, from both the summer and for Christmas, although at Christmas is more understandable, as you've said. You know, given that the providers are being paid, presumably the people who deliver the activities will be paid anyway, regardless of the numbers that turn up to take part in the activities. I assume that's the case. Maybe that could be a question. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to answer a couple of those points, really. The 20% might not seem great, but against other local authorities, we're doing quite well. Has been a massive challenge to all authorities that have really struggled, as I say. Most of that capacity would have been taken up, so there wouldn't have been many places that went empty bums on seats, if you like. That would have been filled with somebody. I should say as well that we've got a 15% leeway between that doesn't necessarily have to be free school meal eligible families. So it's not a good tester, if you like, of a family that might be in crisis. So the DfE kind of recognise that. So roughly 15%, and this is probably true of our programmes as well through summer and Christmas, that there will be about 10-15% that won't necessarily be free school meal families, but have been identified as being in need in some other way.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the update, Tim. Just on the issue of sort of take up and capacity, taking the money we had from government this year, the 383,000, if we'd have had a bigger take up, 40, 50, 60%, would we would we have encountered issues in terms of the money we'd been given by government wouldn't have been sufficient to deliver the provision for that kind of greater number of young people. So I suppose it is the money predicated on an assumption around take up. So that's question one. And the second question was one that I know kind of taxes my brain a lot when we're talking about ward provision summer activities, is the 13-16-year-old age group, who, despite our best efforts, I'm sure there's similar story in other wards, we haven't yet found an attractive option for older, younger people. And from reading the report, that seems to be something that that you've identified in terms of half take up. I just wondered if you had any bright ideas as to how we can try and address that.
Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, just to answer both those, the DFE kind of gave us a rough guideline as to what we would be spending per head on meals, if you like, in terms of the funding. So they give a rough estimate of £2.63, I think it is, but that's practically not really realistic when you're dealing with smaller numbers and smaller organisations. This funding, I think, was really written in the thought that schools would be on board and would be able to knock out hundreds of meals from school canteens quite cheaply, and that hasn't really been the case at all. So we've had to engage with often non-profit and private providers to be able to deliver, and they can't get the food for that kind of price. So you'll probably find a lot of the meal provision was double that. So most were working to more like £5 per head for a decent lunch or decent meal per day. That's probably where we would fall down if the percentages of numbers we were actually managing to provide for went up considerably. I think we'd have to go back and look at the way we commission it and the way that we deliver it entirely if we were going to be hitting certainly 60% plus, and certainly I think we'd need to engage with schools a lot better than we have. But it's true of all authorities. Certainly East Riding were in the same position as us, in that initially back in Easter we had the hope that schools would take this up and run with it. So we'd have some of the big hitter schools that would have the higher numbers of free school meals delivering their own half programs, and we would just be facilitating that through funding. And that did happen in Christmas through so we did have Clifton Green running their own half program at Christmas, and they did that really well. And that's kind of the blueprint as how half should be run, really. But in all authorities, you probably find that schools are struggling to take it on, and certainly in summer, many of them are even closed for capital works, etc., for the summer period. So it's been quite a challenge. In terms of the older children and young people, the 13 plus, Christmas did actually look a lot better than summer. So we engaged with a couple of new youth providers, and we had a little outreach project. I say little, it's quite a big outreach project that Directive 4 were running. This is where Directive 4 were originally not going to run anything, and that was a big fear to me, because this is one of our prized youth providers in the city that we've got left. So I kind of had a few people's arms up their back to try and persuade them to definitely run something, which they did, and they did an outreach project that in the north and east of the city went really well, and in the west it was completely swamped. So they had probably about 3 times the number of young people that were interested in doing some activities and getting a meal hamper. So what we did there was engage with Foxwood Community Centre, and rather than run a community hub open to all eligible families through Foxwood, we just targeted at those young people who were kind of on the waiting list, if you like, from the outreach work that Directive 4 was doing, of which there was about 40 families, I think, 42 families. So that worked quite well, and that was again going back to the way in which we ran the food hampers from Hobmore. That worked well in terms of being able to be responsive to those providers that were finding that they were struggling with that capacity. I've no other bright ideas, as Stephen was saying. We're kind of struggling in terms of what we have in terms of youth provision in York. We don't really have that much, but things are springing up. And I did work with I want to say St Andrew's Church in Huntington. I might have got that wrong. Ian's nodding. Who have a youth provision there, and they were really good because they're literally next door to Huntington Secondary School, so they already do youth provision there through the week and have good relationships with those young people. So there are youth provision in and around the city. It's just finding it at the minute and trying to engage with them with a HAF project, because they're often quite informal and low key what we do have happening. So that's often sometimes a challenge to get those providers to get their head around what HAF is and to be able to provide something that would satisfy the DFE in terms of the needs and wants of policy and procedure, if you like. It's worth saying and mentioning that a lot of the food provision has to align with the school food standards. So it needs to be healthy stuff. It needs to be a variety of things. And obviously now we've got the new regulations in and around labelling food that all is an added challenge to some providers. That's why we need to be quite careful in terms of who we have in terms of a food provider that comes alongside any of the activities that we put on. I can't use the example of, and it's not a very good one, of some of the community centres having the volunteers sort of buttering baps over summer. As much as that would be great to do, they would need the right kind of policy and procedure around what they're offering to be able to do that. And that's something that we're hoping to potentially use a bit of the money for some training into next year to be able to upskill some of the providers and some of the community partners in doing that. But I think that's going to be a slow burn, to be honest.
Right, thank you very much, Tim. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Tim, I might have missed part of this because my video's been coming and going and all sorts, but just could I get a little bit more detail on the paragraph 14? I mean, firstly, thank you for what you've been doing in terms of trying to deal with this, and getting up to 20%, I guess, is great. But it does mean that 80% of children went hungry. And is that, and could you just clarify, is that 20% have attended 4 weeks of 4 sessions, or is it less than that? Because obviously that 20% is based on those 677 attending everything. So could you just clarify?
Yeah. So for Christmas, we knew that was the full 4 days of Christmas that we were providing for. So, for example, when we talk about the food hampers and activity packs, the food hamper is designed to last a week, essentially. So it's not just like a small meal pack. And the commissioned activities themselves were running for those, if not the full 4 days face-to-face, then something like a blended approach with 2 days face-to-face activities, but then they would be given an activity pack and extra food to take away with them. So particularly for Christmas, a lot of the providers were doing big shopping trips, if you like, and providing families with those extra 2 days of food. And that's fine in terms of what the DFE were asking us to do. As I say, they caught a lot of authorities on a bit of a back foot in that some authorities wanted to just offer the meal hampers and activity packs, but at the last minute DFE insisted that there were face-to-face provision. How we go about addressing the other 80% is going to be something that we need to look at longer term. I think we are doing quite well in terms of comparisons to other authorities. Some are really struggling with the HAF programme. As I say, it's a challenging thing to put food alongside activities when you've not really done that before. It brings into play, as I say, a lot of policy and procedure that you need to consider that some of the providers haven't quite got their heads around always. Yeah, it's kind of a work in progress is all I can say. We've kind of tried to consider this year very much a pilot and see how that goes. I was saying a little bit before about those families that are very much in crisis and how we go about making sure that they're the ones that aren't going hungry. So that would be where we would work with our early help colleagues to provide those food hampers. We need to find ways of making that happen quite easily, whether we do door drops again or whether we have little food banks in the community hubs and children's centres, as I was talking earlier about. Those are a couple of options to us. But I think at the minute it's more about I want to say it's getting the food to the right families, and then we look at growing and expanding that as we go into the next year. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Tim. Councillor Webb, do you have a supplementary? I see your, or is that still hand raised?
No, it is a supplementary, Chair. I suppose, I mean, certainly in my ward in Heworth, when speaking to residents on the doorstep about this issue, and these are residents in an area that really would benefit from and have benefit, insulted that, you know, they, because of poverty, were being asked to sing for their supper, essentially. And I was wondering if you'd had any problems around that from residents.
No, sorry, Bobby, you're breaking up a little bit, but I'm not quite sure what you mean. We've not really had any negative feedback in terms of that. I think there's been some confusion over whether families are getting the vouchers or not, because I think there's been a bit of a change in how free school meals over the summer and over the holiday periods have been addressed. So prior to half, excuse me, families were getting the meal vouchers that I think came from the winter COVID grants. And then that switched to the half programme kind of gradually. There was a bit of a mix of both for Easter, and then as went into summer, and obviously this Christmas it was just the half programme. Having said that, we did hear from some families, and I know I did get an email from Councillor Fenton about one family who had a £15 voucher, but obviously didn't think that was enough, so we're able to do a doorstep delivery of some food provision alongside that. It has been I suppose what I'm saying is families have had a little bit of a mixed message as to what they're entitled to in terms of the free school meal provision in the holiday periods, and hopefully that'll iron out into next year. But in terms of negative feedback, not really, no. It's been all quite positive, I think, through the half programme. I think if anything, some families have struggled to find out about it or found out a little bit too late. That's probably one of the few negative bits of feedback we've had. But as I say, we're hoping to work a lot more closely with schools, and I think once we get those key people in each school, they'll be able to do a lot of the publicity for us and a lot of that careful targeting.
Right, thank you, Tim. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just, I suppose, a sort of clarification in my own mind. So we obviously we have the sort of 20% take up through the half. In terms of the 80% of young people that didn't access the half offer, was the to what extent would the voucher offer provide a sort of a mechanism for those families to receive support during the holiday period when they weren't involved in the half offer?
So unfortunately, DfE won't let us provide vouchers through the half funding.
But it's separate to the half. I'm just trying to understand whether the voucher scheme was something that ran in parallel with the half. Pauline's got a hand up.
Thank you, Pauline. Please come in.
Because of the cost of the voucher scheme, which is £50,000 to £55,000 a week, we were only able to identify funding for non-half weeks. So the answer to that is that it's not an alternative during a half week to have a voucher.
That's helpful. I just wanted to be clear in my own mind in terms of what the kind of sort of pattern of provision was between half vouchers. But no, thanks for clarifying that.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions from members? No, in that case, I shall just go back to the minutes from our meeting just check the date, of the 27th of September. Whilst we've been talking about the HALF programme, Anne Coyle has very kindly asked Sharon Stoltz to reply on the issue of the two-year-old health check. And the response is 2-year-old health checks are reviewed by Health and Adult Social Care Policy and Scrutiny Committee as a public health commissioned and provided service via the Healthy Child Service. 2-year health reviews are mandated in the Health and Social Care Act 2012 and public health regulations. Sharon can provide an update to children's scrutiny if required, but it may be helpful for the chair just discuss with Councillor Paul Doughty as chair of HASC Scrutiny. Sharon can pick this up with the chair afterwards if helpful, so that we are not reporting the same in various committees. Thank you very much, Anne, for doing that for us. In that case, we have no further questions on HAF. It just remains me to thank the officers who presented to us, Tim particularly, and move on therefore to Pauline. Do you have something to say on? Yes, I expect you do, on the reporting back to exec.
Yes, if I can, Chair, if I can just outline what's happened with the voucher scheme and then come back to executive's request. But I'll also take the opportunity to just outline what other grant funding has been available to support families with food over this winter as well. I'll be as brief as I can be, because I know you've got a lot to consider. So following lockdown in early 2020, the government funded vouchers during that lockdown for school children at £15 per child per week, but didn't provide anything for holidays at that point. Since then, from October 2020, the council's managed through government grants and council emergency funding to fund the continuation of the voucher scheme, specifically during school holidays, again at £15 per child per week, at a current total cost of £54,000 per week. That's funded to the end of half term in February, and in totality the funding has cost around £350,000. The challenge around is that we have had no evaluation of the scheme. It's not particularly inclusive or based on need. It is basically issued to children who are eligible for free school meals, and the scheme is administered through schools. It has been funded, as I say, through emergency funds that all end at the end of March 2022. Just to mention the other grants as well, in terms of the household support grant, which is the latest form of family support, of which 50% of the grant is for food. 2 grant payments are being made from that funding. One in December, one was made before Christmas, and one will be made in February. And we've paid £385,000 out to 2,748 families. And we expect to do the same in February. In addition to that, if any family has contracted COVID and the breadwinner of the family cannot, or parents of the family cannot work, there is a £500 test and trace payment. And in the summer and autumn months, they were down to single figures per day, but since Christmas Eve we've had 330 applications. So it just shows you how much pressure is coming onto the system now to support families, because a lot of the applicants for test and trace do work, but they're in low paid jobs or casual work, which actually stops when they're all sick. So just wanted to outline some of the other support schemes. And in terms of executive's requests, that's outlined at paragraph 2, and the paragraph indented there around how effective the voucher scheme is, and given that the council can't afford to fund the scheme beyond February, what are the alternative provisions that could provide a suitable alternative, taking into account also the work that's going on in the hubs, the HAF scheme, and also the work that's been requested through the York Residents' Right to Food motion as well, and then bring back some recommendations to executive. So the Scrutiny's asked to consider that tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Pauline. Can I just ask for some clarification around paragraph 10, which says the DFE confirmed that funding will continue in all LAs in England for the next 3 years, with funding of £200 million per year.
That's the HAF scheme.
Yeah, that's for the HAF.
Right,
yes.
Okay. Lovely. Okay, thank you. So do we therefore, Councillor Fenton, do you want to have a question first of all?
Yeah, I suppose clearly we know there is need, and we know with things coming down the track in terms of fuel bills and other pressures on household income, then that is not likely to go away. So I take Pauline's point around, we have lack of information about the impact of the scheme that has existed thus far in terms of, is it reaching the right people? Is it sufficiently targeted? I think I don't have a problem with, as a committee, us considering the effectiveness, impact and funding of the voucher scheme. But I think we need to understand, or I would at least, the effectiveness and impact to then be able to take a view as to what a future funding arrangement might look like. It'd also be helpful to understand the broader sort of funding landscape in terms of the interaction with WIFAS and other sources of support. So I mean, here and now, I couldn't give an informed view as to what a future, what a successor scheme might look like, or whether to recommend a sort of continuation of what currently exists. But it's certainly something that we've been asked to look at, and I'd be happy to work with others and with officers to do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Fenton. I'd be happy to join you on that. Do we have any other volunteers to work in a small group to begin to understand better the issues at work here? Perhaps the third person might be Councillor Fitzpatrick. Is that a yes?
Yes, sorry, yes.
Thank you very much. Right, so we'll contact one another, and I'm sure we need some help from relevant officers to bottom this quite complex issue, and we'll look forward to doing that with you. Do we have a deadline? Do we know, Pauline?
Yes, there is a pressure, given that funding is only available to February half term. What I would say, in the published draft budget proposals that are on the council's website that were recently consulted on, there is £100,000 in there to support children with holiday hunger. So again, recommendations around the use of that, should more time be needed, might be appropriate.
Thank you very much. Would you like to suggest officers we could contact to begin to set a small group up to work through the issues?
Yes, I'll arrange that for you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right, I think that means we can move on to our third. Well, I think the numbers are slightly different. Our fifth item on the agenda. This is the finance second quarter monitoring report. I suspect Richard Hartle will be joining us for this one. Thank you, Richard. Nice to see you. Happy New Year.
Nice to see you and to you. Thank you. So thank you, Chair. So this is your Q2 monitor. So in the sort of usual fashion, this is an extract of the children's services budgets that were included in the Q2 monitor that went to the executive, I think on the 18th of November. So we pull out the parts that are relevant to children's services, present them here for yourself with just a little bit more detail, particularly in terms of the table that's on, I think, page 27 of your agenda, which just sets out the summary position, which shows a projected overspend of about 6.9 million at Q2, compared with about 6.6 at Q1. So about 300,000 higher in terms of the projected overspend. I think the major pressures within that are broadly or pretty much similar to those that we were reporting to, what I reported to you when we looked at Q1 a couple of months ago. And they are significant overspend within children's social care, driven by the increase in the number of children and young people in care. So the base budget, as I've mentioned before, was designed to support round about 200 children and young people in care, sort of within the range of 190 to 210. And the number that we had at the time of this monitor was around 270. And that's clearly driving both the pressures in placement costs and also staffing pressures within the service. There are also some less significant, but by no means insignificant pressures within home to school transport, and then within the dedicated schools grant funded special educational needs budgets. And within that particular area, we are currently in discussions with the DfE around developing a financial recovery plan for the DSG, and in particular, sort of high needs, special educational needs area of that. I'll probably stop at that point in terms of the summary, and open it up to comments and questions from yourselves.
Right, thank you very much, Richard. It just occurred to me that clearly COVID has had quite a considerable effect on the budget. Can you hazard a guess or an accountant's approximation of how much proportion is actually increased deficit by reason of COVID?
I mean, it's very difficult to come to a precise figure clearly, but if we look at the position that we were reporting in previous years, we can see that clearly that number of children and young people in care has gone up significantly, and over this period, I think that's probably had an impact on it. It's probably, I wouldn't like to try and hazard a guess at this point. I'd probably just be plucking figures from the air because it's probably impossible to tell exactly. But yeah, it has had a significant impact. What I would also say in terms of that as well, though, is if you looked at the overall executive paper that looked at the whole of the council's budget, you would see in there that there were some mitigations on the overall position in the council due to some of the COVID grant allocations from government as well that would have helped to offset some of that pressure, but clearly nowhere near enough to deal with the position that we're reporting at the moment at Q2.
Lovely, thank you very much. That's a very fair answer. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. I know I'm going to sound like a broken record now because I've mentioned this all the time. Out of city placements have always been a major concern of mine. I've dealt with them professionally in the past in another authority. Also, Councillor Cuthbertson and I were going to visit an out county placement. I believe in Harrogate. That was before, 2 years ago virtually, so obviously we haven't been able to do that since. I just would like to have a proper breakdown in the future, if I can say this now to officers or to whoever, to know exactly. We're often told it's only one or two, it's only a few, whatever. And I understand the data confidentiality aspects of who they might be, but I would really like to see a greater breakdown of exactly the reasons why people are out county, how much it's costing, and also how it's moderated, how we're sure that they are safe and how we're sure that their educational needs are being met, and just a better overview of such a large amount of money being spent.
Okay, yeah, I mean, certainly on the financial aspects of that, we can give a more detailed analysis of the numbers in different categories and the average placement costs and things like that. Clearly, you've highlighted there is an issue if we've got some categories where there are a small number of individuals, and we might just have to think about confidentiality. And I'm sure the colleagues from the service will be able to help in terms of expanding that and putting some narrative around that. So certainly we could look at doing that for either the next time we bring this monitor, which I think will probably be the Q3 now, won't it? So we could have a look at providing a more detailed table around that for you. That shouldn't be an issue. We do have that. We have that information clearly. We use that to drive these monitoring reports, so we could present that to yourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Heaton.
Thanks very much. Just looking at page 29, we've got a number of breakdowns and comparisons with Q1 there between points 10 and 14. Looking at and considering previous quarters beyond Q1 as well, so into last year, are there any trends developing there, or are we looking at particular snapshots? Are some increasing consistently, some decreasing consistently? Where are we with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I would just go back to the overall position that we're in. So I think nearly all of these particular pressures, they're all linked, and they're all clearly linked to that increase in the number of children and young people that we've got in care at the moment. So I think clearly that's gone up steadily over probably the last 18 months, almost 2 years. And that continual increase has then driven those increasing costs in all of those particular budget areas, particularly around the ones that are directly around the interventions with young people, but also around the staffing as well, where clearly the caseloads are increasing. So the number of staff that we're needing to employ, and particularly agency staff, are increasing. I wouldn't say directly in line with that, because as time goes on, the service are better at managing those costs, even though the numbers are increasing. So they're not going up in direct proportion, but they are clearly linked to that increase in the number of children and young people in care. And there's no real getting away from that. That is what is driving the overspends.
Sure. And in terms of court and child protection teams spending there, obviously the more we have, the more that's going to cost. In terms, I think it was a previous meeting, we were discussing the fact that that there is more capacity in the local child court now for North Yorkshire. In terms of that, are we getting cases through consistently and effectively? Because I know that had been an issue we'd had in the past, which was only hitting us with more costs.
It's probably not a question I could probably answer, Councillor, from the finance side. So I don't know whether any of my colleagues who were on the call from Children's, maybe Anne would be able to just pick that up for me, just to help me there out. Anne, if that's okay.
Yeah, no worries at all. And good to see you all, and Happy New Year to you. So I think there's a range of things that I think it might be quite helpful just for you as Scrutiny to kind of understand what we're doing about some of this. If I go back to, allow me just to give you a bit of a conversation about this, if you will. So our current children in care figures are standing at 283. I think that's the highest it's been. We had a number of little babies that we had to intervene with just before Christmas. And one of the key pieces of things that we've put in place, there are 4 particular pillars of improvement that we've put in place. I now chair something called our Children's Resource Panel. It went live from the 1st of December. I chair that, and on that panel it has 3 different key component parts. The first part of that panel is about the prevention of our children coming into care or having the right children in care, because we know that we do have to look after some children in public care. But crucially at that panel, what we now have is a local area coordinator from early help and communities, because often the kind of wisdom out there in communities can help to stabilise families, and that we work less in a bubble in social care. But we also on that panel have our targeted intervention service, and Rose will talk to you in a bit when we talk about early help around the importance of stepping into family life to try and manage some of the complexities that happen in family life and some of the turbulence. So those are really important parts. That's the first part of our panel. The middle part of the panel is about getting it right in terms of legal intervention. So whilst we take legal advice, all of the job and social work, people like me who've been in the business for 30 odd years, is about actually what kind of advice we need to take, and sometimes actually whether we need to manage risk better in the community. Whilst you may meet a legal threshold for something, it may not always be the right thing to do. It's about the work you do as a family to manage that risk. And then the third bit is for those children who are in our permanent care and where life becomes more troublesome and troubling for them. And often those are the children that Councillor Fitzpatrick would be concerned about earlier on, around out of county children, where we end up placing them further away than any of us are comfortable with. So any children that need a decision about them actually now comes into this panel. So the point of the Children's Resource Panel is high scrutiny, huge support, and rapid decision making. That's a significant difference, and it's a marker in the sand for us from the beginning of December. Now, having done that in 4 or 5 other local authorities, that's the way you have grip around the right children coming into care. And also our finance colleagues sit at that panel with us. So that real interconnection, the interplay across communities for prevention, finance for cost, right decision, right time. And at the panel, the social worker and their manager present. And then the aim is to prevent where we can, to make rapid decisions where we can, and to be conscious about quality as well as cost, really. So I think if we come back and report to you in about 3 months' time, it is normal for a panel like that to take 3 to 6 months to have a really tight grip. A little bit unusual that a statutory director of children's services chairs a panel like that, but actually right here right now, I think it's the right thing for me to do. And it also allows me to be really close to practice and then give you some assurance about that. So I feel confident about the children that we have had to bring into our safe care over the last couple of months. I do think there's a piece of work for us to do to be able to look at the other end and how we help children return to their family's care. Some of that is around how we work with our multi-agency partners, about not thinking that being in care is the answer, when actually not understanding the kind of trauma thing that happens to children when they're separated. So we've got it's never a one answer to this. It's a whole partnership, and actually how we build stronger, safer and more accepting communities that maybe have to handle a bit more troubling behaviours, but in a supported way. But when Rose talks to us about early help, you'll see that the threads tie together a bit. Councillor Heaton, you just mentioned about courts. You know, we have a significant piece of work to do with the courts in York. My view is that we have a highly interventionist court structure who are at times not helpful to the way that children's social care may want to manage children being together with their family. And my own view is that I think we are highly interventionist, and sometimes we have children on orders that may need to not be, that could be managed in a different way. What we're doing about that is that I meet with the Leeds judge monthly or bi-monthly. We're joining up with North Yorkshire because they have a different experience from the courts that we do in York. Some of that is also about our social workers growing confidence to be able to challenge the court system. And often when you're in care proceeding environments, a lot of decisions are made out of negotiation or outside of the courtroom. Certainly the piece of work that I'm doing a lot with the service at the moment is to have the confidence to give evidence and stand up and be very clear about what we believe is in the child's best interest, and have that decision made through evidence as opposed to agreement. Now that's a learning thing for York, and that's part of how we need to grow our confidence and competence of our workforce, but also the strengthening our legal advice at times. And so you can see everything I talked to you about is dependency and other parts of the system. But I feel really pleased about the fact that we've got Children's Resource Panel up and running, because, and the reason there's a statutory DCS for doing that is to be really clear about what our learning needs are when we have workers that don't seem confident when actually they really know what they're doing, really. And often a court environment can be quite an intimidating environment. So it takes a fair bit of confidence, really, to be able to stand up when everybody else completely disagrees with you and you're thinking about risk. And then you only have to look at what a media frenzy there is at the moment around children's social care, and actually we can end up with a situation that drives us down that further. So hopefully that answers your question. And happy to take any more if any other things have popped up for people as I've spoken.
Thank you, Anders. Can I first of all go to Councillor Fenton? And if you think about any other questions you'd like to ask Anne, please raise your hand. Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question also on page 29, paragraph 13. One of the areas of overspend in the MASH and assessment teams relating to vacancies being covered by temporary and agency staff. So we've heard previously about the challenges with recruitment into children's social worker posts. Is this a similar situation with a desire to recruit but an inability to get the right people in, or are there other reasons behind those posts not being filled on a substantive basis?
Sure. Now, hopefully, I'm hoping you'll all grab a hold of social media at the end of this conversation today, because hopefully you've seen our live recruitment campaign that's out there, and certainly I've been very active on things like LinkedIn over the festive season. We purposely went live just before Christmas so that we could try and capture, that new year, new job, new fresh idea, and try and galvanise the right people into York. There is an issue nationally about recruitment, and we have more temporary staff than we would want to. I think it's very important that you understand we've got a number of agency members of staff who've been around for quite a long time. So we often think that agency means fractured relationships for children, but actually we've got some agency staff who've been with us for over a year. I don't think that that's a worry. I think that is a proportionality of agency staff that we've got to reduce, and we've got to reduce that safely. We're going to reduce it in relation to relationships that children have with key members of staff. So another part of the recruitment campaign is to see whether we can, embrace our agency staff onto full-time and permanent contracts. The whole country wants to do that, really. So I think it's a particular issue for us at the moment. We're fishing in a very small pond. Some of our, part of our staff have been involved in some of the recruitment campaigning that we're doing. We've purposely used York's history to think about come and make a difference, and for people not to think that York is all just about tourism and the beautiful city that it is, but that actually we need, real trouble happens for children and families in York, and actually that's what social work is about. So helping people to understand that's not a negative thing to talk about when you're actually trying to do a really positive recruitment campaign and get experience for us. We don't have a difficulty with our newly qualified social workers. We've got a good offer for them, but actually where it becomes a little bit more difficult is in those experienced social workers. So our campaign is live. We're also recruiting for some of the managers. What we have done is we've done some investment into a pilot project as soon as we're able to recruit business support staff bespokely into some of our teams. That is a phenomenally attractive situation for a social worker to come into. So it's not, we've got to make sure that we offer the workforce the right kind of package so that the majority of their time is spent directly with children and families. And from experience, that's how you get good staff.
Thank you very much, Anne. Councillor Webb, you had your hand raised earlier. It seems to have disappeared from my screen suddenly. Do you still have a question to ask?
Yes, can you hear me, Chair?
I can.
Great. Yeah, it was to be honest, it was all about temporary staff as well and what we are doing. It's good to hear that we're doing a recruitment drive, but I know that it's a problem that's been consistent for a while now, and I think this is obviously it's highlighted in almost every one of those paragraphs about the mitigations about the problems as the reason for the overspend. So I think it's really important to stress the issues here, and I hope that this recruitment campaign does make a difference. But thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Webb.
If you don't mind me coming in behind that, if that's all right.
By all means.
I think some of the other things that we've looked to do, so elsewhere you would take a real, what Barnsley did a number of years ago is they took an absolute decision that they would overload their social workers with casework, and they made their caseload very, very high, really. But they did that as a system, and they decided to bring in lots of newly qualified social workers on the basis that they would grow their own, and over time that would start to reduce casework, because that was a strategy that they deployed, really. That's worked for them for years. But Barnsley now are in a situation where they need to bring in some agency workers. And I think it's an ebb and flow of the difficulty of trying to recruit in this profession. What doesn't help is some of the media campaigns that happened just before Christmas and some of the slaughtering of social workers in the media. And what we've got to do is to be able to counterbalance that somehow. It's not social workers who hurt children, really. Actually, there is something really important about how we hold the value of what this job is, and we help people to feel good about it, because some of the things that happen before Christmas are the things that chase people out of this profession. And I've been in it for 30 years and seen it in every shape and form or another. What I feel confident about is that, we've got a lot of work to do in York to build really strong, resilient, confident, proud social workers. We have got a whole number of them with us, but we need to manifest that enormously. But that takes support. It takes infrastructure. One of the things that we've just done is to reach across the principal social work network regionally. I'm really keen that we find some mentors for our new managers, because it's a difficult job, but we don't all just try and mentor from within York, but actually reaching out to seek mentoring across the PSW regional approach, to be honest, also makes us attractive, because it's another way of how we bring staff in. So campaign is one thing, it's a big hit, really. We're in the Guardian as well, but actually there's lots of other softer management and leadership things that are happening both regionally and nationally. So if you haven't seen our campaign, one of the things I woke up, if you can believe, on Christmas morning and thought, oh my God, I don't do Facebook. When I go to Scrutiny, I need to ask everybody to pick up our campaign and put it onto Facebook, because we are also trying to recruit some great admin staff. So you can be part of helping us to do any of that if you're connected in that way.
Right, thank you very much, Anne. If there are no further questions on this item, I'll thank Anne and Richard for their presentation and move on to agenda item 6, which is the early help via CYC local area teams. And I'm looking for Rose to come and talk to us on this topic. Are you there, Rose?
Hello, good evening,
Good
Chair.
evening.
My video is saying I can't start due to the host. I'm thinking now that's allowing me to do it. Thank you, Ollie.
Yes, we can see you now.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay. So yes, I'm here to talk to you about the early help and the targeted intervention service, and give you an overview of the early help in the City of York. And I just think it's really important to say right from the start that everyone in the City of York who works with children and young people and families has a responsibility to support the delivery of early help and support children and young people and families in accessing appropriate services. I have been involved with the partnership in terms of an early help strategy 2021 to 2023, which promotes the view of an effective early help model, of one which is about collaboration and brings together families with their local communities and professionals that are already working with them from universal services, and pulls together an early help system to work together in a joined up, coordinated approach to ensure that children and families receive the right help. Effective support to families should involve a team around the child approach, and this includes our partners from health, from schools and education, housing, and our adolescent mental health services, etc., and other agencies. And it very much needs to be a coordinated plan of support to children and families. And where possible, agencies that are working with children, when they identify that a child has additional needs, they should look at completing an early help assessment with the child, and where possible, and with the family, and looking at what support is available, and look at whether they need to provide a single agency provision or whether that support needs to be more coordinated and they need to bring other people on board and to support the family as part of that team around the child and family. As part of that team around the child and family, there should be, and there needs to be, a family support provision which is more targeted and which provides more outreach provision to support children and families. And that targeted support should include specific work on increasing parents' capacity to manage a child's behaviour or juggling the needs of multiple children within a family, looking at what support is needed for the family and making sure that that support is part of that team around the child. So this early help system that we're looking at as a partnership is very much supported by the government Supporting Families agenda. It used to be referred to as the Troubled Families agenda, and that changed in April to Supporting Families. And the early help system guide that was brought in May, which is continually being reviewed in this next year, but it very much is about that collaborative approach and services being provided to children and families within their local communities at a universal level at that very early intervention stage. So in terms of the Child and Family Targeted Support Service, I'll just give you a bit more information in terms of what that is and how that will work. So as part of a service restructure, colleagues in the local area teams, the early help service, that is the immediate response and educare service, and child in need practitioners have all merged together into one child and family targeted support service. And all children within the service at an early help level will have an allocated worker, and at a child in need level, those workers will be co-working with a social worker. And this service provision will work alongside partners where there is a need for a team around the child and family, and to provide a more time-critical targeted response to improve outcomes for children. So it's very much about what is the impact on children, and what do we need to achieve as a group of professionals working with a child and family to improve outcomes for children. So the City of York has created have created a Customer and Communities Directorate, and that has an emphasis on supporting customers, building resilient communities, and recognising local people are best placed to understand and find solutions to the needs of their communities. And so it's very much about close working especially, you know, we've talked about today in terms of the HAF and school meals, and it's very important that we join up those links for the services that are available. And so this, the targeted intervention service will have an increased focus on prevention, early help and asset-based community development, working alongside our partners in communities, and just creating a more wide-reaching early help network within communities. So the partnership offer is very much led by the government directive from Working Together, Safeguarding in Education, and the Early Help System model and Supporting Families agenda. And it's very much about that support should be provided to families in the first instance from universal and community services, and that then includes a need to provide that targeted intervention for those families that are really struggling. So in January, the City of York Safeguarding Children's Partnership launched the revised partnership early help strategy, and this in January there is going to be a full launch, which will include revised documentation and practice guide and support partners, and to increase the number of partner-led early help assessments and increase the number of team around the child to support children and families. There is a need to improve the data within the partnership to ensure all agencies are cited on supporting families, and to ensure we understand how effective we are at as a partnership at meeting children's needs. And that very much is in line with outcome indicators, along with our partnership outcomes for children, and hopefully to demonstrate the effectiveness of the revised early help strategy. So key indicators for the measurement of an effective early help strategy will include an increased number of partner agency-led early help assessments and coordination team around the child and family. It will hopefully achieve a reduction of referrals to children's social care, and also a reduction in the number of children subject to child protection, and ultimately to children in care, a reduction.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Rose. That's very helpful. Do we have any questions from members? Councillor Fenton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Rose, for the report. I think I agree that understanding the effectiveness of the new arrangements is going to be key. Otherwise, yes, but it begs the question. We've made some changes. We have an ambition as to what we want to achieve, but have no way of measuring whether it's actually delivered that. So it's good to hear that that's the that the plan is to try and better understand the impact of the interventions. One of the things that I noticed on paragraph 18 on page 35, there's a reference to co-design of family hubs, which is something that appears in the next agenda item in terms of some work around community hubs. I just wondered if you could explain a bit more as to what the vision is in terms of family hubs and how they might work and how they might contribute towards sort of the outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So in terms of early help to children and families, as I said, it's very much about collaboration and about supporting children and families within their local communities. And family hubs, as community hubs are about bringing services together in one place. Because what we need to achieve is that a tell us once approach to children and families where there's a need for support, that they don't have to go to multiple services and they don't have to look around for that support, that they know where to get that support, and that should be by, you know, within their own schools and their health visitors, and, you know, being able to say, you know, help me, I need some support, or, you know, I've got food, there's food poverty, I've got difficulty with the amount of food I can provide to my children. They need to be able to find that support at, you know, within their local community and with the people that are already supporting us. So as a concept, the community hubs and family hubs is about bringing those services together so that they're more accessible to children and families.
So the only thing I would add to that, if you don't mind, Rose, is that I think it's really exciting opportunity for us to really strengthen communities, and actually the idea of family hubs. When it initially came out, people were thinking it was like a children's centre plus, but actually family hubs give us a real opportunity to be all age and to be diverse and respond to what particular community needs are. So we've done a bid, and we'll talk about it in a bit, in terms of the family hubs as a transformation piece. So the first stage is to get some transformation money and be able to think about what actually are the real needs of York, and what could that look like. If you remember earlier on talking about how we need to front load families in order to prevent children coming into care or make sure that we've got the right children in care. But also we have relatively low children subject to child protection plans. And there's a question for me around if we had a bit more capacity wrapped around community strength and safety, could we actually manage a bit more of keeping children together through using a different kind of statutory lens? So it's a very exciting opportunity for York and for others around the country, really.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. It was, I honestly think Councillor Fenton's been reading my mind. It was exactly the same part of the same paragraph. Timescales, however, around the co-designing family hubs, I mean, what are we missing in York that would mean this will work? And what's the timescales around it? When are we likely to see any family hubs?
Shall I take that one, Rose, or do you want to?
Okay, Anya.
So the money comes upstream for the transformation part of developing family hubs over the next, and we put the bid in, the closing date, forgive me, it was like the last week or week before Christmas. It's quite tight turnaround for it. There's a kind of 12 months walk into the transformation, so that actually you do the groundwork to think about what the actual needs are and what could it look like, so that it's not just we've got this number of children's centres and therefore we just, you know, jump onto them. That actually this is about transformation. Some of the, you know, my view is that we're still quite a long way back in our partnership, really understanding that, you know, when you see an issue with a family, you don't always need a heavy end statutory duty social worker to be able to have that conversation about need with a family. So we've got quite a big piece of work to do to grow the confidence that various parts of the partnership to be ready to embrace something like Family Hub, so that it doesn't become a tick list and you go there, but actually it's based on need as opposed to service. So what does a family need and how do we wrap that around them? And I think the piece of what we're doing in early help will really help us to get the Family Hub bit right. So actually it's come at quite a good time for York as we start to redress some of that, what does need look like, as opposed to what service do we offer, but actually what does need look like in families. And the answer to it, Councillor Webb, in terms of when do they actually come, you know, when would you have your first Family Hub? Well, I think that's 12 months away at the earliest, but and it has to be, because if we're going to do this work well, to understand the difference between what families need, what if they don't get it, it becomes harmful, and then actually what becomes risky. Those are the levels of need that needs quite a lot of work in York to get the Family Hub right, so that it doesn't become yet another service that people get bombarded by referral, but it doesn't actually produce an outcome. Do you agree with that, Rose?
I definitely do. Yes, I mean, in terms of, family hubs has come at a, it's a really exciting concept, but we don't want to lose sight of the fact that, in terms of our partners, we need to be looking at more early help assessments by our partners. So a school, when a child's in school that and they identify that a child has some early help needs, that they do the early help assessment and look at what support can be provided to the child and family. And you don't necessarily need you don't need a family hub to do that. You don't need the services in one place, because you've got that partner being able to access those services. It will enhance the early help provision, but it's not the be all and end all. It's not it's not going to improve until we have a family hub. That's not the way to look at it.
Right. Thank you very much. Councillor Webb, you still have your hand raised. Do you have a supplementary question to ask?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I do have a second question, and it's about timeliness of issues being dealt with. And I've been told from various people that essentially when children and families are referred to the early help service, sort of allocated through to that service, or so that's wrong. They've been referred to the service and then they're allocated towards a particular stream of help. But then what then happens next if those allocations start to build up? So essentially lots of families and children are being sent towards the same person in a lot of cases, I guess. Then how are staff dealing with that? You're getting a lot of people. Is it causing a high workload level? How's that working at the moment? Because there seems to be a need to move families on, so there isn't a waiting list, but then obviously that means they have to end up somewhere. So could you just elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so in terms of early help being more focused in the communities, and people already working with children and families, looking at starting the ball rolling in terms of an early help assessment and looking at what support is needed. It wasn't necessarily always happening as it should be. So our partners were referring into the service without actually completing an early help assessment, so not understanding what the needs of the child and family were. So there was quite a build-up of children being referred into the service and then sat, waiting for that service. That's now changed. And every child who is referred into the service is allocated a worker within the targeted intervention service. And what we're saying is that support needs to be part of a team around the child. So what was happening previously was our partners were looking at referring into the service and then thinking, job done, it's referred to our early help service, when actually what we're saying is that isn't the case anymore, that our children and families, if there's a need for a targeted intervention, there's also a need for a team around the child. So that still includes health, that still includes our schools, if there are school children in that family, and that it continues to be a multi-agency response rather than just a service and one person trying to provide support to a child and family. So in terms of capacity, it is about levels of need, and at the moment we have the staffing to provide that amount of need, that response to that amount of need that there is at this moment in time. As we look at our partners providing more, we're hoping to prevent the need for a targeted intervention and ultimately a statutory intervention, because what was happening previously, where children were being referred into the targeted intervention service, hadn't been given the opportunity of that universal provision. They were being referred straight in. So that was then causing those children to have one way out of there, which was up into statutory services, when actually that support needs to happen at an earlier part in the child's life and become more preventative within the local community, bringing communities together to support the child and family.
Thank you very much.
If you allow me supplementary. On that then, so the child is allocated to a worker and then essentially goes back to, in a lot of cases, I imagine the person who, or the community that referred that child in the first place. But what resource goes back with that child? Anything, or how will that work?
Well, it's not necessarily a resource, because what we're saying is that children referred into the service, then partners can't just absolve responsibility. Our schools and our health visitors will continue to be involved with the child. So it's not a case of going back. It may well be that there isn't a need for support of the targeted intervention service, and health and education and other partners can continue to support the family. But it's quite clear that sometimes children and families need very, very low levels of support for a longer period of time. And we know that support is best served by that local community in that prevention and that early help. So it's not really going back to them. It is that the local community provide those services at a universal level for children and families.
Thank you,
Does
Rose.
that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Rose. I'm trying not to be difficult, but I think it's obviously that the communities themselves, whether that's a school or whether that's health, or they've also got their own funding problems, and that's definitely nothing to do with anything here in this virtual meeting. But obviously it is very frustrating, I think, and I think even thinking about training and support that can be offered to our partners, I think it'd be really, really helpful in lots of situations. And I think it's just an ongoing conversation, I imagine. But thank you very much.
Yeah, just to come in there, Councillor Webb, on the training, it is part of the partnership response, and as part of the launch, that training will be delivered to partners. And when people talk about not having capacity to support children and families, in schools and whether they refer into the service or they don't, they are involved in that team around the child if that child needs support.
Councillor Fitzpatrick, you've been waiting a while.
Yes, I have. Thank you, Chair. I just want to say, well, firstly, I'm very glad we're not talking troubled families anymore. That was a dreadful title that should never have been used. We said this before.
Yeah.
I also, excuse me sounding cynical about all of this, but, this is just more of the same. I think what you're doing, Rose, is great, and Anne's description of it. I certainly wouldn't use the word exciting. I don't think anything about what's going to be happening to families and children over the next 6 months is going to be exciting. Changes to universal credit, changes in all sorts of ways, are pushing more people into poverty. Forget food poverty, we're talking poverty here, and these families are going to be more and more challenged, really. And jargon like, teams around the child, all of that. I mean, I've just heard it all before, so often over so many years. It's just rebranding under a different name. So I'm sorry if I'm cynical, and I'm not criticising anybody here who will do the very best they can within York. But, it's just, we'll wait and see how this pans out, is all I would say on this. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, team around the child isn't necessarily a new concept. It's been in working together, and it's been in the, in various governments. In terms of team around the child, it's very much just looking at what support is available and making sure that those partners talk to each other. They don't just work in silos. And we know that multi-agency working is far better for children and families, and that children and families do better if they are supported by people that they trust, rather than it jumping to a social worker who then scares the living daylights out of them and often drives them underground and not wanting to engage in support. So we know research tells us that early help does work, and I understand, Councillor Fitzpatrick, that it is, it has been said before, but it is very much about partners in York coming together to support children and families.
Anne, do you want to come in at that point and respond?
Yeah, no, thank you. I was only going to say, I've been somebody, in this business for 30 odd years, as you've heard me say before, but part of that has also been about working in the early help landscape. And actually, it depends on where you start. And I just want to stress to you that in my experience, we're quite far behind the curve in terms of people understanding that we may use language like relationship-based working and trauma-informed, and that's really well used across York. But what it really means is if a child talks to you, you're their chosen person. Or if a family talks to you, you're their chosen person. And actually, it's how the relationships around the professional network wrap around that chosen person. And we have examples in York in the front door where children bounce through children's social care when actually what they need is a conversation with somebody that might be a trusted person in the community. But they have to go up through the statutory ladder to come back out the other side. And some of that creates high caseload. Some of those children further down the line are not managed in terms of the level of worry that's then interpreted as risk, and some of those children end up in care. So it's part of being able to understand that relationship-based approach to, if you're a health visitor and somebody's got a housing problem, you can contact housing yourself. You don't need a social worker or to go through a funnel to be able to do some of that. They're really simple examples, but they are real people's lives and they're lives of people in York. And we know that when this works elsewhere, why can't it work here, really? So I just want to give you some assurance. I have huge amounts of experience in that, as does Rose. There are some really good people around at the moment who understand this, having worked elsewhere, but it is quite a big hill to climb to engage hearts and minds when perhaps the experience before hasn't delivered what you needed it to.
Thank you, Anne.
Family hubs, my final point is one of the reasons that family hubs, and it's like a pendulum, this stuff sometimes. One of the reasons why family hub is good is that actually it goes beyond the age of 4 and 5, really, and thinks about family, whole family approach.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fitzpatrick, do you have a follow-up question?
I want to just come back on that and say, certainly I agree with all the intentions we've got here, but I still remain sceptical. So I hope that all this does come to fruition. For example, only today it's been announced, and I'm looking at maybe our administration to be able to press government on this. The sugar tax, £300 million last year was saved because of the charges that came back for that. They were told at the time, in 2018 when all this was pushed through, that money would go to children. It would go to support families, children's services in local authorities. It hasn't. It's gone straight back to the Treasury. So I just feel we still need to be pressing government. We still need to get the money that we need into local authorities to make all this happen. And I hope, Anne, you're right, but I know we'll get reports on this as we go along. So thank you to you and Rose for what you've said, but I still remain cynical because I've been doing this work for more than 20 years, 30 years in schools and local authorities, and it's more of the same, to be honest.
Thank you, Councillor Fitzpatrick. Any more questions for anyone? If not, I shall call an adjournment for 15 minutes. Right, in that case, can we start at 7:30?
Do we need 15 minutes, Chair?
Well, let's make it 10 then. Let's make it 17:25.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you all back at 7:25. Thank you very much. Right, I think we can start again. Thank you, everyone. Welcome back to the Children Education and Scrutiny Community Scrutiny Committee on the 4th of January. The next item is item 7, which is the Community Hub's Scrutiny Review, the interim report. And I'm going to ask Councillor Webb if he'd like to introduce this one to us.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Myself, Councillor Fenton and Councillor Fitzpatrick have worked together over sort of the last year or so, I think, looking at community hubs, and essentially we started from a premise of, you know, what do we want a community hub to look like, and how do we make them relevant and useful, and what are the barriers to them, really? Because obviously, if we can work out what it is that residents need, if we can work out, you know, what those barriers are, and we can work out how we can make it something that becomes sustainable, then that will be a really, really useful starting point. If I'm honest, I'm slightly disappointed in where we've got with the Community Hubs Scrutiny report. I don't think we've got as far as we would have wanted, and that I think really has been down to well, the fact that the people who could have helped us with this at the council have been, you know, dealing with a global pandemic. So there's a fair reason for why this might not have been the top of everybody's agenda, but I do think that there's more work to do. One thing I will say is we did have the advantage of having support from an internship for a brief period, and actually the report that is Appendix 1 was produced by this intern. And I actually think it's a really sort of nice summary of what community hubs can be and what different communities have found around the country as useful, and what can work and might be useful to work in York as well. And I think if you look on page 53, for example, it talks about place, people, and purpose, and they're really the key strands. Is your community hub? Is it, you know, a physical space? Is it a venue? Is it something at the heart of a community? And we talked about the fact that in a ward like Guildhall, for example, that might not necessarily be the right way to go, because obviously there's so many different communities within that area. Then, of course, people. I think it's absolutely key that we are looking at how we can involve people in this from the start. And I think as ward councillors, all of us can probably think of a situation where when things have been resident-led, it does tend to get things off the ground and get things to work a lot quicker. And finally, purpose. There was quite a wide-ranging discussion, I think, about the fact that what might be a community hub, say in my ward of Heworth, where there's, you know, high levels of deprivation and real poverty concerns, might not necessarily be the same purpose for a community hub if you were to have a community hub out in, say, some of our outer villages. And how we need to really look to ward councillors and look to the local community to get that information to try and make a community hub relevant. So it's not really a very much a one size fits all. It's very much what works for the local area. And I think that we've already touched tonight on family hubs. And I think, you know, a personal plea for me would be actually, whatever our community hub model is, I think a focus on family, I think would be really, really beneficial. And as you can see in the report, there are several case studies of what has been happening in other parts of the country that I think are really quite useful to just have in the back of your mind. We did intend to actually get in touch and speak to some of these other areas and some of these other deliverers of community hubs, whether they be council, whether they be sort of resident-led or sort of a mixture of the two. But unfortunately, I think, again, difficulties from sort of our own side in organising things, and also difficulty from the other parts of the country as well, led to some issues. Finally, the only other thing I want to say is the reason that it's got draft written across this is because this item was obviously written by me, at least the first bit, not the sort of the covering bit, which, you know, as you know, a politician, it's writing your own report. There's always going to be some skepticism there about, you know, how biased this is or not biased this is. I've written it to try and not be, but I think it's important to recognise that, you know, we didn't really have huge amounts of officer time for this, and there's lots of reasons for that. I'm not blaming anyone. It's just the facts that are in front of us. But that's why, like the previous month's report from Councillor Baker that had draft on it, that's on that as well. Councillor Fenton, Councillor Fitzpatrick, is there anything that you would like to add to anything I've said there?
No, I think it's a fair summary of where we've got to and the reasons why we haven't perhaps got as far as we would have liked, but, you know, hopefully we can continue to plug away. I
equally, you know, I'm quite pleased with where we are so far, although there is more to be done. And thanks to both to Stephen and to Bob, but Bob especially for the amount of work that's gone into this. And from my involvement on a local level in my ward, one thing that's come up recently, and I suppose because I know Maura's here, maybe for advice as well, but all three of us that have done this are very involved in our wards with either a particular hub, or in the case of Guildhall, there is more than one. It's just the nature of the safeguarding policy and safeguarding training for volunteers that work in these places. Just to say that I'm in the process at the moment of talking to CVS to arrange some training for volunteers, and I'm a director of one of the hubs for directors as well. Would you think that's the right approach, Moira, to do that? I mean, we clearly need to, as you know, the cases get more challenging, if you like, with people that will come along to the hubs and whatever else. Volunteers are volunteers, and they're very well-meaning and really want to do things well. But in terms of their protection and the protection of the organisations, the hubs, there does need to be some safeguarding training, I would imagine, on a fairly regular basis. Would you agree with that, Maura?
Councillor Fitzpatrick, thank you for that, and I'll just come to that. I think in terms of training, yes, there are lots of opportunities that we can offer people. Safeguarding is certainly one of them, and when we've gone through the emergency response, let alone the community hub response, and at the very least having a basic understanding and doing that online, where we've had to do that as a very basic understanding, is extremely useful. And to me, listening tonight at some of the threads that have come through, we are in a really sort of magical position in a lot of ways. There are so many big challenges, and I'm not trying to take anything away from that or gloss things over, but actually there are lots of elements there that we can pull together. And your comment about basic training there, I was just thinking about an example of, I was at one of the HAF sessions at Chapelfields just in the lead up to Christmas, and just being part of it was fabulous. Obviously being there, not fabulous that so many people were in so much need, but the difference that a safe space and the trusted relationships made to the amount of people that had got to hear about it and came along. Doing it through an established community hub really worked. The relationships with families was excellent, but actually also observing some of those volunteers really connecting with people, encouraging them to get what they needed, but also you heard so often, oh, I've got this issue, or can I just have a word? And there was a lot of that informal support going on, and I think that's so important. But like you say, to back that up with some decent information and basic training is always useful, whether that's about food safety, whether that's safeguarding. Just giving people the confidence to be that community support is extremely important.
Good, thanks.
Thank you, Maura. Thank you, Councillor Webb, Councillor Fitzpatrick, Councillor Fenton. Does anyone else have any questions for our triumvirate? Just Councillor Cuthbertson, did you have your hand up? You're on mute.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I'm deliberately on mute because I don't know why my hand appeared to be up.
Oh, I see. Right, okay.
Sorry, no, I don't. I mean, I'm very
to watch that. Thank you.
I'm very interested to hear what's in this draft report, and I look forward to rereading it in a little bit more detail.
Thank you. Can I just ask Councillor Webb what the next stage might be towards finalising your report?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was hoping I'd get the chance to sort of talk about next steps, because as I've outlined, one of the things we'd intended to do and haven't done that I think really would push us forward is to talk to some other areas about what they're actually doing. As well as that, actually talking to some of the things, some of the people and providers that we have here in this city as well. And we did previously talk, and we, myself, Councillor Fenton, Councillor Fitzpatrick, met with Maura to discuss almost hosting a bit of an online meeting between deliverers from elsewhere around the country and deliverers from this city, to just have a bit of an open conversation about what people were doing, what worked in a community hub, and what the barriers were. And I think that if we could get that off the ground, I think that would be a really nice step forward. That would mean that, you know, we could get you know, Councillor Cuthbertson as executive member for children's. We could get Councillor Smalley as executive member for communities, get them along so they could hear this, and hopefully that could help form part of this community hub strategy. Because at the minute, it's I feel that we're in a position where community hubs seems to be the word we use when we've noticed poverty and we want to solve poverty, and therefore we say community hubs. And I think that means lots of different things to lots of different people, and that might be okay, but we just need that, I think, clarifying and almost writing down to because it might be that whilst we've got some great activity going on in some places, I mean, the work that's put in Tangor Community Centre is fantastic, and I will declare an interest as a trustee of that community centre, but it's great what they're doing. But equally, there might be a gap in provision in, like, Weldrake, for example. And I'm not saying there is, I'm just using that as an example of a place that's far away, that we might want to look at. So if we can get different people together to have a chat about what works and what isn't working, I think that'd be really beneficial. So I would like to revisit that with the members and with Maura, and then hopefully after that we could provide a bit more of an update, if that's acceptable to the committee and to the members and to anybody else who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Webb. I'm sure we'd be very pleased to see the finalised report when you've had the opportunities to discuss with other local authority areas and other providers of hubs around the country to finally add the last polish to your report.
Just on that note of the idea of a finalised report, is I can't deliver a finalised report because I'm not a council officer, I'm not a scrutiny officer or anything like that. So part of the reason this says draft is because, you know, I'm an elected member and not a policy officer, and I know that we have a real problem around resource for that. But I want to make that clear that that's the reason it says draft on it, not because it's wrong or incomplete or incorrect or anything like that. It's the same as the previous report from Councillor Baker, is that, you know, it's, as much as I'd love to write reports as an elected member, it's not really quite right, is it? I think there's an issue with checks and balances there. So it's just something to highlight to you as chair, really. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a solution for it, because in my days as a council officer, I used to work on scrutiny into retailing with Councillor Merritt, whom you know well, and others. And certainly a democracy officer wrote it, but we did all the kind of legwork and so forth. So I'm sure that we can find a way forward to make that possible and proper. Right, if there are any more questions, I think we'll proceed on to item 8, if we may. This is the work plan. So before we actually start discussing that, I'd like to thank all our officers who've come along tonight to written reports and present them to us in great detail and answered all our questions. So I'd like to thank you all very much. And for those of you who wish to stay, you're welcome to stay, but I suspect many of you would like to leave the meeting and find some food and so on. Do you have something else to say, Anne, before?
No, I was waving to you. Thank you very much.
Well,
That
thank you.
was really good.
Thank you. It's very kind. Right. Thank you all.
Lovely to see you all this evening.
Thank you. Right. On the work plan, you should have had an updated copy through from Jane with some text in blue. These arose through meetings I had online with Charlie Croft, who I was quite keen that we made a full effort to cover our committee's remit, which is, as those of you who've looked it up will know, it's a very wide remit, covering obviously children, education and communities, but the cultural offer particularly. So we have worked together to insert 1 or 2 items, one under April's, which is the 13th of the month, the Make It York cultural update, and that's the cultural part of what it is, the work that Make It York do, not the management of the city centre. And in July, the York Explore in GLL Leisure annual updates, which come to the committee obviously once a year, and the York Learning's annual report, again, that annual one, which I know several of you will have seen in the past. Can I have any comments on what's proposed, please? Clearly, there is space there to add additional items in both March, I would suggest, and July. But at this stage, this is kind of where we are. Any comments you'd like to make?
Chair, I think seems good to me. I do think that for obvious reasons over the last year and given given what's going on in children's services in York, I think there's been a real clear focus on that from this committee, but that has sometimes, I think, been at the expense of maybe scrutinising some of the cultural offer the city has. So I think it would be only fair to put a little bit of that in.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. I think it's important to achieve a balance and make sure that over a period of time we don't leave anything out. And there's obviously there are many important cultural elements in the city, just as there are in caring and looking after children and education standards and so on. So, Councillor Heaton.
Yes, thanks. I may be missing something here. Indeed, tell me if I am. We on the paper form we have a meeting in May, but we don't seem to have that on the updated form. Is that something that's just been shifted?
It wasn't included because the May one is a meeting, a joint meeting, isn't it? That's why. Yeah.
Where we are.
Yeah,
Understood.
that's the reason. That's the mental health paper.
Sure.
And thank you for clarifying the 13th of April. Chair, my paper says 31st of April, which should be
Yes.
impressive, good as we are.
You should have an updated version that certainly Jane and I discussed that this afternoon. I said there's something amiss here. So apparently 31 should have been 13 and not any other date. Right. Okay. We'll let that stand for now. Clearly, we'll look at it again at our next meeting and see if anything other pressing items have come up. I'll move on now to item 9, urgent business. I don't have any urgent business for the committee. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to raise? If not, I shall thank you all for attending and giving us your opinions and questions, and look forward to working with you again. And obviously, Happy New Year for 2022. Thank you. Good night, all.
Good night.
Good night.